I was the only black in law school. This was the 60s when there was a lot of turmoil.
Selwyn Romilly blazed trails, becoming BC's first black judge despite overwhelming barriers.
There were no black judges. There were no interracial judges. It was a white bench.
Romilly died of cancer at his home. He was 83 years old.
To avoid some of the injustices that we seem to have.
Romilly was born in Trinidad and Tobago in 1940 and moved to Canada as a young man. He attended UBC Law School in the 60s. As the only black student, his challenges were immense.
As a young black man, he couldn't get a dishwashing job, so he had to start in the mines. And he used to deliver food in the prisons, and he had to work his way up to a dishwashing job, so he was extremely ecstatic when he got a dishwashing job.
After graduation, Romilly moved his family north to Smithers, where he opened his first practice. He made history in 1974 with his appointment to the provincial court. Then again in 1995, when he was named a BC Supreme Court Justice.
He was known for being an eminent jurist, from my perspective, and a mentor to everybody in the profession. And he was certainly a role model for people of color to come along behind and break those barriers as well.
As a judge, his legal rulings were known for their elegance and storytelling, even their humor.
He had an amazing sense of humor, and that's what many people remember about him. Even in his court cases, he was known for finding amazing quotes and kind of was jokingly called the quoting judge for much of his career.
In May of 2021, while on a walk in Stanley Park, he was wrongly detained and handcuffed by Vancouver police. The incident resulted in formal apologies from the VPD and the city and pushed Romilly to advocate for reform around handcuffing and racial profiling.
I think he strongly believed that, you can use the system to try to address injustice. And I think with the police incident that happened in Stanley Park, in the end, what ended up happening is they changed the legislation around handcuffing.
Romilly is remembered as pragmatic and persistent in the face of racial discrimination, a brilliant legal mind, a mentor, a father, and a friend. Michelle Gassoub, CBC News, Vancouver.
The reason I finally, decided to say something is because of this wrongful arrest.
Last week, Vancouver police mistook and detained a retired BC Supreme Court judge who is a black man in his 80s for a much younger and violent man. And now 2 women who were assaulted by the actual suspect are perplexed by the way police acted that day.
Well, I think the VPD jumped the gun and they seemed... It almost seemed predestined that they would do that.
Fatima Jaffer and her friend Maya Veek weren't there to see when retired BC Supreme Court Justice Selwyn Romilly was mistakenly cuffed by Vancouver police. But they were here on the seawall when the actual suspect took a swing at Jaffer.
And somehow he just kind of went off and came right at us and right onto me and swiped. And I leaned back and jumped into Maya. And he missed. And Maya screamed at that point because she was so shocked that I jumped into her.
Jaffer describes the attacker as quite disturbed and that he was speaking gibberish. After the man jumped at a woman on a bench, Jaffer started recording this video and he left the scene.
Yeah, and me too.
At this point, a well-known community member named Kentish, who often tends to these flowers on the seawall, goes after the attacker to make sure they wouldn't hurt anyone.
What disturbed me the most was, though, that Kentish had gone after him. And I didn't want Kentish hurt because he's a black man and I don't trust the cops when it comes to black people.
The two decide not to call the police, but on their way home, Jaffer spoke with a VPD officer at English Bay, explicitly telling them it was not a black man they should be looking for. Also, Fatima says the officer didn't even ask for her name and feels they were more focused on catching the perpetrator rather than listening to what she had to say.
And the only reason I talked to the cop was to make sure they don't go after Kentish. So I was absolutely shocked that night when I read on Facebook that a justice, a black man who we are familiar with on the seawall, was wrongfully arrested instead. I don't understand what triggered them other than his skin color to arrest Justice Romilly.
In a statement, VPD Sergeant Steve Addison says in part, retired Justice Romilly matched the description provided to officers, a dark-skinned man, 40 to 50 years old with a shaved head, dark pants, jacket, and red shirt, but that it quickly became clear he was not the suspect. He adds, there were a number of callers on this case, as well as people flagging down officers as they were doing their patrols. As you can imagine, it was a dynamic situation with lots of information coming in real time from various sources. The suspect was arrested and taken to jail, but since any witnesses or victims were unavailable or had declined to provide statements, no charges can presently be recommended to Crown Counsel. Jaffer is still shocked by the outcome.
It wasn't just that I was assaulted, it was also that I had talked to the police and told them. They knew better.
In Vancouver, Kier Junos, City News.
Vancouver police apologizes for arresting the wrong man. The action is being deemed as an inexcusable act of racial bias/profiling. Selwyn Romilly, the first black judge named into the BC Supreme Court, was handcuffed at 9:45 a.m. while out for a walk along the seawall. The 81-year-old retired judge was detained. Sergeant Steve Addison reported to Black Press Media the man fit the description of a man who was assaulting strangers near the seawall at English Bay. It was reported that the suspect would appear to be walking normally, but would then suddenly start kicking, punching, and spitting at people. Under the violent nature of this horrific incident, Romilly was handcuffed publicly. When it became obvious that he was not the suspect and had done nothing wrong, Addison said the handcuffs were quickly removed. Vancouver Mayor Kennedy Stewart states, "I am appalled by the wrongful handcuffing and detainment of retired Justice Selwyn Romilly and have reached out to apologize. Systematic racism is a reality of our colonial institutions. Incidents like this are unacceptable and cannot continue to happen."
Yeah, I walk around the seawall every morning, and around 9:45, a police car drove up towards me and stopped, and another one came back up, and the police officer started talking to me, asked me, he said, "There's someone matching my description that was reported to them causing a disturbance or something, I can't remember." And without much further ado, he put me in handcuffs. I think he said it was for officer safety. Well, there were 5 officers there, all 6 foot something, taller than I was. I had no weapon. I had nothing. I wasn't a threat to them. At that time of the morning, Third Beach is packed with people. So here was this black guy, me, in handcuffs. It's very embarrassing.
I rise to mourn the passing of the Honorable Selwyn Romilly. He was the first black student to graduate law at UBC, the first black provincial court judge, and the first black justice on the BC Supreme Court. Indeed, he had many firsts. 3 years ago, at 81, he was the first black retired justice to be handcuffed in public by the Vancouver police, mistaking him for a 40-year-old black felon. True to form, Selwyn did not use that humiliation for bitter retaliation, but worked with police to change handcuffing procedures. Justice Romilly was recognized by his peers as a wise and eminent jurist, a trailblazer, an advocate for civil rights and justice in his judgments. He was a role model to young black lawyers. He was a trainee, like me, a year ahead of me in high school. He was a friend, teacher, and mentor to many. We will miss him.